I woke up in a hospital bed to learn that while I was fighting for my life, my parents sold our family home so my sister could drive a brand new Mercedes. At dinner, they told me I was nothing to be proud of, while she dangled the keys in front of me with a smile. That was the moment I realized I wasn't just the forgotten daughter. I was the one holding the truth my grandmother had left behind, and the world was about to see it. My name is Rachel, and this is how betrayal can lead to justice. The steady beep of the heart monitor was the first thing I heard when I opened my eyes. The sterile scent of disinfectant clung to the air, sharp and unrelenting, and the fluorescent lights above me flickered faintly. My body ached in places I could not name, but it was my chest that felt the heaviest, as if someone had laid a brick on top of me. A figure leaned over, adjusting the IV line at my arm. She wore scrubs with a faded pattern of daisies. Her name tag read, Lily Carter. She smiled softly when she noticed I was awake, but her eyes betrayed fatigue. "You're lucky," she said gently. "You were out for a while." I blinked, my throat dry, and tried to ask what had happened, but only a raspy croak came out. "Rest," she said, placing a hand on my shoulder. "I'll get you some water." When she returned, she held a cup with a straw. The first sip burned down my throat, but it also reminded me I was still alive. I wanted to ask how long I had been here, what day it was, if anyone had come to see me. Before I could, the door opened and my parents stepped in. For a second, relief swelled in me. Their presence meant home security, the roots of everything I once trusted. But their expressions were tight-clipped, as if they were already late for something more important. My mother Elaine smoothed her blouse before speaking, her eyes skimming over me like I was a stranger. My father Richard kept his hands folded behind his back, his gaze fixed on the linoleum floor. "You're awake," my mother said, her voice even almost brisk. "That's good." I tried to smile, but my lips trembled. I wanted to ask if they had been worried if Anna had come by, but the silence stretched long before my father finally spoke. "We've made a decision, Rachel." The way he said it made my stomach drop. I braced myself. "We sold the house." The words crashed against me harder than the accident that had landed me here. My pulse quickened, the monitor beeped faster. I thought I had misheard, but his expression didn't waver. "Our house." I forced the words out, my throat tight. "The one on Willow Street." It wasn't just a house. It was the place where I learned to ride a bike, where Christmas mornings smelled of cinnamon rolls, where my grandmother Evelyn told me stories before bed. It was the anchor to every memory that had shaped me. "Yes," Richard said simply. "The market is strong," and it made sense. I turned to my mother, desperate for her to contradict him, to say it wasn't true. But Elaine only adjusted her pearl necklace and added, "It was time." I shook my head slowly, disbelief making my vision blur. "Why now?" "While I'm lying here, Anna needed the money," my mother replied, as if it explained everything. "She's starting a new chapter in her life." Something inside me cracked. Anna. Of course. Always Anna. What could she possibly need that was worth selling our home? My father's voice cut like a blade. "She bought a car." For a moment I couldn't breathe. The beeping of the monitor filled the silence, mocking the chaos in my chest. "A car," I whispered. "Not just any car," Elaine said. "A Mercedes, the GLS model. It's important for her image." I stared at them both, unable to comprehend. Years of memories sold away for leather seats and polished chrome. "So you sold the house that carried 3 generations of our family, so Anna could drive something shiny through town." Richard's jaw tightened. "Don't exaggerate. You don't live there anymore. You have your own life." My voice cracked as I spoke. My life was in that house. Every inch of me was built in those rooms. "Anna deserves support," Elaine said firmly. "She has ambitions, opportunities. She's building something." "And what am I?" Then I asked, heat rising in my face. My father's eyes met mine for the first time, cold and hard. "You've never been anything to be proud of, Rachel." The words landed heavier than any injury. My body trembled. The machine at my bedside echoed the panic racing through me, faster, faster, until Lily hurried in and checked the wires. She looked at my parents sharply, sensing the damage they had done, but neither of them moved closer to me. I closed my eyes, tears slipping hot down my cheeks. I tried to picture the house, the creak of the stairs, the worn rug in the living room, the lilac bushes that bloomed every spring. But the image felt like smoke slipping through my fingers. When I opened my eyes again, my parents were already turning toward the door. "Rest," my mother said, her tone flat, as if we had just finished an errand. "You'll need your strength." The door clicked shut behind them. I lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to the steady beep that refused to stop, even though part of me already had. And that was when I whispered to no one but myself. They sold my childhood. They sold everything I was, and for what? A car. The sound of my voice disappeared into the white walls, and all I could do was close my eyes again and wonder what else they were willing to sell, if it meant Anna could shine. The morning sunlight spilled faintly through the blinds, and for the first time since the accident, I asked Lily to pull my phone from the drawer. My hands still trembled when I tried to hold it, but I needed something solid, some proof that home still existed. I searched the address on Willow Street, the one burned into me like my own skin. What came up was a real estate listing already stamped with the word sold in red letters. My stomach clenched. The pictures scrolled past room by room, each space scrubbed clean of our lives. The rug in the living room was gone, the yellowed curtains replaced with crisp white blinds, the chipped banister polished until it gleamed like it had never belonged to us. I remembered Sunday dinners with roast chicken, my grandfather at the head of the table telling stories about his youth, the sound of my grandmother Evelyn's laugh filling the kitchen. I remembered hot summers when Anna and I would run through the sprinklers until our hair clung to our faces, and she always got the bigger towel. Every memory stabbed me now, sharper than the bruises still hidden beneath my gown. A knock at the door startled me. Lily opened it, and in stepped Mr. Anderson, our old neighbor. His hair had thinned, but his voice was the same steady baritone I grew up hearing over the backyard fence. He carried a paper bag with apples that smelled faintly of cinnamon. "Rachel," he said softly. "I heard about the accident. Thought I'd stop by." I swallowed hard, grateful for his presence. He set the bag on the table and sat down near the foot of my bed. "I guess you know by now," he said after a pause. "The house is gone." My chest tightened. How could he say it so plainly when every part of me was screaming, "It sold fast"? He continued, shaking his head. "A young family put in a cash offer, $650,000. Couldn't believe it myself. This neighborhood's gone crazy since they announced the new commuter line. Everyone wants a piece of it now. $650,000. The number echoed in my head. All the birthdays, graduations, holidays reduced to a price tag, Mr. Anderson's eyes softened. "I still remember you, little Rachel, running barefoot across the grass, your hair sticking to your cheeks. You'd bring over cookies that you and your grandma baked." He chuckled. Then his face grew sad. That house held a lot of life. I turned my face to the window, unable to stop the tears. The image of strangers walking through those rooms, strangers laughing where we once fought and loved, burned inside me. "Do they even know what they bought?" I asked bitterly. "Do they know they bought more than walls and wood, that they bought my childhood?" Mr. Anderson sighed. "That is how it goes. But I wanted you to know it was a fair price. It wasn't like they gave it away." Fair. The word made me want to scream. Nothing about this felt fair. He hesitated, then leaned closer. "I also thought you should hear this from me rather than gossip. Your parents seemed proud talking about how Anna's new car will open doors for her." He looked at me carefully. "I'm sorry, Rachel." I closed my eyes. Proud. Always proud of her, never of me. Mr. Anderson stayed for a while, filling the silence with stories of the old block, how Mrs. Riley's magnolia tree had finally toppled after a storm, how kids now played soccer in the cul-de-sac where I used to ride my bike. Each word was a reminder that life moved forward without me, without us, without that house. When he finally rose to leave, he touched my arm gently. "Don't let this take you down, kiddo. You're stronger than they know." After he left, the room felt colder. I pressed my hand against the thin blanket, imagining it was the rough wooden floor of my old bedroom. Every detail came back with painful clarity: the squeak of the faucet in the bathroom, the smell of laundry from the basement, the ivy that climbed the garage walls, no matter how many times my dad hacked at it. Now it belonged to someone else. They would repaint the walls, tear out the bushes, replace the windows, and none of it would remember me. I whispered to myself, it wasn't just a house. It was the only place that ever told me I belonged. The beeping of the monitor carried on steady and indifferent, as if it didn't matter that my world had been hollowed out. I let the weight of that truth sink in, too tired to fight it, too hurt to imagine what could possibly come next. 3 weeks later, I stepped through the front door of my parents' new house, my body still stiff from the accident, but strong enough to walk without the cane the doctors had offered me. The air smelled of lemon cleaner, and something else that felt unfamiliar, as if even the walls refused to recognize me. My mother called from the dining room, her voice bright and practiced, and I followed it like a thread. The table was set for 4, roast beef steaming on a platter, candles flickering, even though it was only 6 in the evening. My father sat at the head as always, posture rigid, his fork already in hand. Anna was across from him, her hair styled perfectly, a small keyring glinting beside her wineglass. I slid into my seat, my chest tightening as I noticed the empty pictures on the wall. None of our old family portraits hung there. It was as if they had moved into a life where I never existed. My mother poured me water, smiling too hard. "We wanted tonight to feel normal," she said, setting the pitcher down. Normal. The word caught in my throat. It was Anna who broke the silence. She picked up the keys and let them dangle in the air with a satisfied grin. "My new Mercedes drives like a dream. You would not believe the handling." My father chuckled softly, and my mother nodded with approval. I stared at the glinting silver keys and thought of the $650,000 that had erased our house, our history, my place in the family. "So that's what the house bought," I finally said. "Leather seats and shiny paint." My father's eyes narrowed. "Don't start, Rachel. Don't start," I repeated slowly. "They sold our home. They erased everything we had, everything I had, and you want me to sit here and clap for Anna's new toy." He set his fork down, his jaw tightening. "You do not live there anymore. You moved out years ago. That house was wasted space. Anna needs this car to grow her career. It was the right decision." I stared at him in disbelief. "And what about me?" The words hung in the air, heavy and unanswered. My mother glanced down, folding her napkin as if hiding inside its perfect square. My father's voice cut through. "You never gave us a reason to be proud, Rachel. You chose dead-end jobs wandering through life. Anna is doing something that matters." The room tilted. My hands gripped the edge of the chair until my knuckles burned. Anna's laugh sliced through the silence. She tapped the key fob, and the sound of the car alarm chirped faintly through the open window from the driveway. "Hear that?" she said, almost giddy. "That is success." I turned to look at her face glowing with the kind of confidence only years of being the favorite could create. My throat ached from the weight of words I wanted to scream, but all that came out was a whisper. "Congratulations." She smiled wider, mistaking my restraint for surrender. Dinner went on. My parents chatting with her about business plans, networking opportunities, and how image was everything. I moved food around my plate without tasting it, the roast beef turning cold as resentment boiled in my chest. At one point, my mother looked at me almost gently. "Rachel, you should understand we only want what is best for the family." I met her eyes. Best for the family, or best for Anna? Her gaze faltered and she reached for her glass. I pushed my chair back, the legs scraping against the hardwood. My heart pounded in my ears as I stood. My father watched me with the same cold authority he always wielded, his silence sharper than any words. Anna raised her glass in a mock toast, her smirk daring me to fight. "To new beginnings," she said sweetly. I forced my face still, my anger pressed down beneath the surface like ice. My voice came out calm, too calm. "Enjoy the car." Then I turned and walked toward the front door. Behind me I heard my father's fork scrape against his plate, my mother's sigh and Anna's laugh ringing like a bell. Outside, the night air was cold enough to sting. The silver Mercedes gleamed under the streetlight, spotless, powerful, a monument to everything I had lost. I stood there staring at it, my fists clenched at my sides, my breath trembling in the dark. The sound of laughter drifted from the open window, muffled but unmistakable. My family's voices mingled with the clink of glasses, their world whole without me. I stared at my reflection in the car's glossy surface, my face pale and hard, my eyes colder than I had ever seen them. And in that reflection, I saw something settle inside me, something sharp and unmovable. I turned away, letting the night swallow me, carrying with me the silence of everything I refused to say. The invitation came in a glossy white envelope with Anna's handwriting across the front, delicate and proud. I almost tore it up when I saw it, but curiosity gnawed at me until the night of the event. The downtown hotel glimmered against the evening sky, its entrance buzzing with laughter and clicking heels. A valet opened the door for me, and I stepped into a world drenched in champagne light. The lobby smelled of polished marble and expensive perfume. Anna had spared no detail. White lilies cascaded from tall vases, a string quartet played near the fountain, and waiters moved gracefully with silver trays of champagne flutes. At the center of it all, parked just beyond the glass doors for everyone to admire, was the silver Mercedes spotlights, making it gleam like a trophy. My chest tightened as I walked toward the ballroom. Inside tables glittered with crystal glasses and gold-trimmed china. Each place card was perfectly written, and mine led me to a smaller table tucked near the back, almost hidden behind a pillar. I sat quietly, my fingers tracing the rim of the water glass in front of me. Around me, cousins and aunts gathered at the larger tables closer to the stage, their laughter spilling across the room. At my table sat a handful of distant relatives I barely knew. Their conversations buzzed with talk of real estate promotions and luxury vacations. It did not take long for the questions to come. "So Rachel," one woman leaned in with a sweet smile that felt sharp, "you are still teaching art at that community school, right?" I nodded. "Yes, I am." Her eyebrows lifted, and she glanced at the man beside her. "That must be rewarding," she said, her tone heavy with pity. He chuckled softly. "Rewarding, sure, but hardly a career." Another voice joined in, a cousin I had not seen in years. "You know, Anna is really raising the bar for this family. A Mercedes, a career in public relations, a network of powerful people. That is the kind of success that makes us proud." The laughter that followed pressed against my chest like a weight. I tried to swallow it down, but the taste of humiliation spread bitterly across my tongue. When Anna appeared at the head table, the spotlight caught her perfectly. She wore a sleek black gown that shimmered with every step. She raised her glass, thanking everyone for coming, her voice confident and clear. Then her eyes flicked across the room and landed on me. She held the gaze for a beat too long, her lips curling into the faintest smile, as if daring me to crumble. I shifted uncomfortably in my chair, heat rushing to my face. More relatives leaned in, whispering just loud enough for me to hear. "A teacher of art. Hardly a real career. No wonder she is at the side table." My hands trembled as I set down my fork. The clinking of cutlery and the hum of chatter swirled together, drowning me. I stood abruptly, my chair scraping against the floor, and the sound drew a few glances. I excused myself quickly, ignoring the smirks and raised eyebrows. The hallway outside the ballroom was cooler, quieter, the air carrying only the faint hum of the quartet from inside. My breathing came in uneven bursts, and I pressed my palms against the sides of my coat. The fabric felt heavier than usual, lined with years of holding myself together. As I slid my hands into the pockets, my fingers brushed against paper. I pulled it out slowly, realizing it was the worn envelope that had been there since before the accident. The edges were creased, the ink on the front fading, but still legible. Grandma Evelyn's handwriting. I froze in the corridor, the envelope trembling between my fingers. For a moment the noise of the ballroom disappeared, replaced by the memory of her gentle voice, her warm hands, the way she looked at me like I mattered when no one else did. I stared at the envelope, my heart pounding, the gold light from the ballroom spilling across the floor like a path I had yet to walk. I slipped the envelope back into my pocket, my hands shaking as though I held more than paper, as though I held a secret waiting to change everything. I waited until I was far enough from the ballroom that no one could see me. The quiet corner near the coat room felt safe, dimly lit, and out of the constant swirl of laughter and clinking glasses. My fingers moved carefully as I opened the envelope, the paper tearing softly like it carried a breath of something forbidden. Inside was a folded note in Grandma Evelyn's handwriting, the kind that leaned gently to the right, elegant and steady, even in her later years. My eyes traced the words slowly, as if each one had to sink into me before I could move on to the next. The house is not just brick and mortar. It is where our family lived, where love was meant to grow. I have made sure that one day you will hold on to what truly belongs to you. A thin business card slipped out, landing in my palm. David Clark, attorney at law. Below the name was an office address in downtown Cleveland, and a phone number written in black ink. My breath caught. My grandmother had not trusted just anyone with this. She had planned something, and somehow she had chosen me. I reached further into the envelope and found something heavier, metallic. It was a key, old and worn, the edges dulled from years of use. I knew it instantly. It was one of the original keys to the house. My hand curled around it, the cold metal pressing into my skin, and suddenly I could almost hear the creak of the front door, the smell of Sunday dinners wafting through the hallway, the sound of my grandfather's voice calling us to the table. A rush of warmth and grief filled me all at once. They had sold the walls, the roof, the windows, but not the memory. Not this piece of steel that connected me to everything they could never erase. The voices from the ballroom spilled faintly through the walls, Anna's laughter ringing clear above the others. I stared at the key at the card and felt something shift inside me. For weeks I had been drowning in their choices, their betrayal, the sense that I was nothing more than a discarded child in their story. Now, for the first time, there was a spark, a reminder that maybe my grandmother had seen something worth protecting. I slipped the key onto my palm and walked slowly toward the elevator. The night air outside hit me like a wave, crisp and cool against my burning face. I clutched the envelope close to my chest as I crossed the street to where my car waited. Each step felt heavier, yet steadier, as if I was walking towards something that was finally mine. When I sat behind the wheel, I opened the note again. I read it once more, then a third time, committing the words to memory. She had known they would do this. She had known how easily love could bend when money glittered in front of it. And she had left me a path hidden in her gentle handwriting and the weight of a single key. I closed my eyes and let the images come. Summers on the porch swing, winters curled by the fireplace, the way Anna used to race me down the hallway before she discovered she was the golden child, and I was the shadow. That house held everything, even the pain, and now its ghost pressed against me through the key in my hand. I drove home slowly, the city lights blurring through the windshield. The envelope sat on the passenger seat, and every glance at it made my chest tighten with both fear and hope. In my apartment, I placed the key on the kitchen table and stared at it under the dim light. My fingers brushed over the grooves, wondering if it still matched the locks, or if the new owners had already changed everything. I picked up the business card and dialed the number, but hung up after 2 rings. It was too late in the night, and my voice would have cracked if anyone answered. Instead, I folded the note carefully and placed it back in the envelope. I pressed it flat with my hands, whispering to myself that I was not done, not forgotten, not powerless. The next morning I woke with the key still on the nightstand beside me. The sunlight streaming through the blinds caught its edges, and for the first time in weeks, I felt something close to strength. I showered, dressed, and slipped the key into my pocket before heading out. The card was tucked into my wallet, its presence like a heartbeat I could not ignore. I drove past the old neighborhood, slowing down as the house came into view. The lawn was trimmed differently now, and toys were scattered across the yard. A young couple stood near the porch, watching their little boy chase a ball across the grass. I stayed in the car, my hands gripping the wheel, my eyes locked on the door that my key once opened. It was no longer mine, not in the way the deed said, but my grandmother's note told a different story. I whispered to myself that this was not the end, that this was only the beginning. As I drove away, I pressed my fingers against the key in my pocket, letting its sharp edges remind me that I still had something they could not take. Something Evelyn had left behind for me to discover when I needed it most. The road stretched ahead, and for the first time since the hospital, I felt I was walking a path my family had not chosen for me, a path my grandmother had carved in secret, waiting for me to be ready. I parked downtown on a gray Monday morning, my hands slick against the steering wheel, as I stared up at the glass building where David Clark's office was located. The card in my wallet felt heavier than it should, its edges pressing into me as though daring me to walk inside. I took the elevator up to the 15th floor, the hum of its machinery only making my chest pound harder. When the doors slid open, I was greeted by a quiet reception area with framed diplomas on the wall and the faint smell of coffee. The receptionist, a woman with kind eyes, asked my name. My voice shook as I gave it, and within minutes I was ushered into a corner office where the blinds let in a soft morning light over shelves filled with thick law books. David Clark stood to greet me, tall, with graying hair at his temples, wearing a dark suit that fit him perfectly, but not arrogantly. His handshake was firm, steady, the kind of handshake that felt like it could hold secrets without letting them slip. "Rachel Morgan," he said, motioning for me to sit. "I've been expecting you." I sat down slowly, clutching my bag on my lap. "You knew my grandmother?" His expression softened. "I did. Evelyn was very deliberate in everything she planned, and she planned something specifically for you." He opened a leather folder on his desk and pulled out several documents neatly clipped together. My eyes scanned the heading, "The Evelyn Carter Trust." I swallowed hard. "What is this?" He slid the top page toward me. "In 2018, your grandmother established a trust fund, valued then at $2 million. You are the sole beneficiary." My throat tightened, and for a moment, I forgot how to breathe. That can't be right. Why me? Why not my father or my mother or even Anna? David folded his hands. "Because she believed in you. She told me you were the one who carried her values, the one who would not let the family home and everything it symbolized be lost to vanity. She worried your parents might favor Anna, so she put very specific safeguards in place." I leaned back, shaking my head. "This doesn't make sense. They already sold the house. They already decided Anna deserved everything. How is this supposed to stop them?" He turned another page and tapped a paragraph with his pen. "Your grandmother included what is called a no-contest clause. It means if any beneficiary challenges the trust, they forfeit their rights. In this case, your parents and your sister were deliberately excluded. If they attempt to contest this trust in court, they walk away with nothing." The words blurred on the page. My parents, my sister, everything they had done to remind me I was worth less than a new car, and here was proof that my grandmother had drawn a line they could not cross. I whispered, almost afraid to say it aloud. $2 million. David nodded once. "It is currently invested, gaining value. The assets are managed, and you can begin accessing distributions, though I would advise patience while we navigate the legal implications. What matters most now is that you know this exists and that it was designed to protect you." My pulse raced, and my palms dampened against the armrests of the chair. I thought of Anna twirling her car keys, my father's cold stare, my mother's silence that cut deeper than any insult. I thought of how quickly they sold the house like it was just property, not the skeleton of our lives. What if they find out I asked, my voice breaking? What if they try to take it from me anyway? David met my eyes, steady and calm. "Then they risk losing everything. And I will be here to defend you. Your grandmother trusted me to do so." I stared at the papers again, the black ink sharp against the white. Somewhere in my chest, hope collided with fear, colliding so hard it made me dizzy. I rose slowly from the chair and walked to the window, staring out at the city skyline. The buildings stood tall, immovable, and I tried to imagine myself like that, unshaken by the storm I knew was coming. Behind me, David's voice was even. "Rachel, this gives you leverage. It does not erase the pain, but it ensures that their power over you has limits. They may think they have taken everything, but in truth, Evelyn left you the foundation. I turned back to him, clutching the envelope with the documents. My voice was steadier now. She really thought of everything, didn't she? His lips curved into the faintest smile. She did. And she believed you would know what to do when the time came. I nodded, though the weight of responsibility pressed down like iron. I was no longer just the forgotten daughter, the one mocked at family dinners. I held a key not just to a door that was gone, but to a future my grandmother had carved for me. Walking out of the office, I felt the papers heavy in my bag, their presence both comforting and terrifying. The elevator ride down felt slower than before, each floor passing like a countdown, to the moment I would step back into the world where my family still saw me as nothing. When I reached the street, the city noise surrounded me, but inside I carried silence, a silence filled with secrets, and the sharp edges of a truth that would not stay hidden for long. I touched the key in my pocket, then the folder in my bag, and for the first time, I knew I was holding something that could shatter everything they believed about me. The sky was clouded, the wind cutting through my coat, but I walked with my head high. I did not feel victorious, not yet. What I felt was the weight of a battle that was only beginning. And for the first time, I was not afraid of it. Anna's world looked perfect from the outside, polished photos on her social media feeds and laughter echoing through rooftop bars, but underneath, I could see the cracks beginning to show. A week after my meeting with David Clark, I walked into a downtown cafe for a late coffee and overheard Anna at the next table, her voice pitched higher than usual as she tried to calm Mark Benson. He leaned across the table, his expensive watch catching the light, his jaw tight. "You need to stop hesitating, Anna. The penthouse is still on the table, but not for long. If you don't sign in the next 48 hours, we lose the deposit. That's 50 grand down the drain, and everyone will know you couldn't follow through." Anna's hands trembled as she lifted her glass of wine, though she smiled like the words didn't burn her. "I just want to make sure it's the right move. It's a lot of money, Mark." Mark leaned back in his chair loud enough for the nearby tables to hear. "It's not just money. It's image. You drive the car, you wear the dress, you live in the penthouse. People need to see who you are. If you back out, you look like every other small-town girl pretending to play rich." I froze, listening from behind the menu I hadn't even opened. Anna's eyes darted around the cafe as if she felt exposed. Her voice lowered, but I still caught it. "I can do this. I'll do it. I don't want anyone to think I can't." Mark smirked, satisfied, and clinked his glass against hers like he had already won. I turned away before Anna could see me slipping out into the cold air. My breath fogged in front of me, but the heat inside my chest burned hotter. I thought of the trust documents folded in my bag, of my grandmother's steady handwriting, telling me to hold on to what mattered. I thought of Anna selling her soul for marble countertops and floor-to-ceiling windows she didn't even want. The next evening, I visited my parents' house. The driveway was already lined with cars, and I could hear laughter spilling from inside. When I walked in, Anna was at the center of the living room, spinning her new car keys in her hand like a trophy. My mother Elaine beamed with pride. My father Richard nodded approvingly, and Mark stood behind her with his hand possessively at her waist. "Rachel," Anna said sweetly, her smile stiff. "Glad you could join us. Did you hear Mark and I are looking at a penthouse downtown? It's absolutely stunning. Skyline views, private concierge. It will be the perfect place to host everyone." I forced a smile, though my stomach churned. "Sounds expensive." Mark chuckled low and smug. "It's an investment. People judge success by where you live. You wouldn't understand that, but Anna does." My father shot me a look that silenced any reply. "Your sister is finally stepping into the life she deserves. We're proud of her." Proud. That word cut deeper than any blade. They had never once said it to me. Not when I graduated college, not when I started teaching, not when I spent nights alone grading papers while they toasted Anna's every whim. Dinner blurred into noise, voices layering over one another, glasses clinking, Anna's laugh too sharp, too loud. I watched her hands shake slightly as she refilled her wine glass, her smile slipping whenever Mark looked away. After dessert, I slipped outside into the cool night air, leaning against the porch railing. The stars above were faint, swallowed by the city lights, but I stared anyway, searching for calm. Behind me, the door creaked open, and Anna stepped out, pulling her shawl tighter around her shoulders. She stood beside me, without speaking for a while. Then her voice cracked. "Do you ever feel like you're drowning, Rachel? Like no matter how much you smile, people still expect more?" I turned to her, surprised. "Anna, if you don't want the penthouse, then don't sign. It's not worth ruining yourself just to make Mark happy." Her eyes flashed panic, replacing vulnerability. "You don't get it. If I back out, everyone will think I'm weak. Mark will leave. Mom and Dad will stop looking at me the way they do now. I can't let that happen." I opened my mouth to argue, but she shook her head, brushing past me and back into the noise of the house. I stayed outside longer, the air cooling the heat on my face. Anna was trapped in chains she didn't even see, golden chains she called success. And I was the only one who seemed to recognize they were choking her. By the time I drove home, her words still echoed in my head, colliding with Mark's ultimatum. 48 hours, $50,000, and Anna's desperation stitched between them. She thought she was holding on to power, but I could see the fear tightening around her like a vice. I carried that truth with me into the silence of my apartment, sitting at the edge of my bed, with the key from my grandmother in one hand, and the trust documents in the other. Their weight steadied me, even as Anna's world tilted closer to collapse. And I knew it was only a matter of time before the cracks in her perfect image split wide enough for everyone to see. The phone rang late on a Tuesday afternoon, while I was still at my desk sorting through stacks of student drawings. The name flashing on the screen was unfamiliar, but something in me answered anyway. A calm male voice introduced himself as Ethan Wright, a reporter with the Cleveland Herald. He explained he had heard whispers about a teacher left behind in a hospital bed while her parents sold the family home. My stomach twisted. Somehow the story I thought was contained within 4 white walls had already seeped out into the world. Ethan asked if I would meet him for coffee. I hesitated, staring at the children's artwork scattered across my desk. Their bright colors looked like another life, one untouched by betrayal. But then I thought of my parents' smug smiles, Anna's glittering car keys, and the silence I had been drowning in. I said yes. We met the next morning at a cafe near the university. Ethan was younger than I expected, maybe mid-30s, with sharp eyes and a notebook already half filled with scribbles. He ordered black coffee. I stuck to tea, and after a moment of small talk, he leaned forward. "I want to tell your story," he said quietly. "Not the glossed-over version people hear at family dinners. The truth, if you're willing." The words tumbled out of me before I could stop them. I told him about waking in the hospital to the sound of monitors, about learning that the house where my grandparents had lived was gone, about Anna's Mercedes, parked in the driveway where my childhood bike used to sit. I told him about the dinner where my father called me worthless about the party, where relatives laughed at my job, about the envelope from my grandmother burning in my coat pocket. Ethan wrote quickly, but he listened more than he spoke. When I finished, my throat raw, he closed the notebook gently. "Rachel, this isn't just your story. It's a reflection of what families do when they lose their way. People will care. They will see you." 2 days later, the article appeared online, "Abandoned in the Hospital, a daughter's story of family and betrayal." My name was there in bold print, my photo taken outside the school building, my words woven into sentences I barely recognized, yet still felt. By noon, the phone buzzed nonstop. Messages from colleagues, old classmates, even neighbors I hadn't spoken to in years. Some offered sympathy, some shared their own wounds, others simply said they believed me. When I walked into the grocery store that evening, I felt the shift immediately. The cashier's eyes softened, the woman in line whispered to her friend, and an older man touched my arm and said, "Your grandmother would be proud." But pity cut sharper than cruelty. Their looks told me they saw a victim, someone broken and discarded. I wanted to scream that I was more than that I held a key and a trust that could change everything. Instead, I nodded and carried my groceries home, their sympathy heavy in the paper bags. Across town, my parents were not so lucky. The next morning, a neighbor texted me screenshots of community forums. Richard and Elaine Morgan were being called heartless, selfish, unfit to be parents. People recounted times they had bragged about Anna's success, while ignoring me times they had brushed off neighbors' kindness. The vitriol spread quickly. At school, I overheard teachers whispering near the copier. How could they do that to her, one said. Selling the house while she was in a hospital bed. The other shook her head. Money changes people. For the first time in years, I was not invisible. Yet the attention pressed down on me, suffocating in its intensity. I had wanted to be seen, but not like this. Late that night, my phone buzzed again. A single text from my mother. You should be ashamed. Look what you've done to our family name. I stared at the words until they blurred. Not once had she apologized. Not once had she admitted what they had taken from me. Instead, I was the villain for speaking. I walked outside into the cool air, the city lights glittering in the distance. My neighbor, Mr. Anderson, was watering his lawn. He looked up when he saw me, his face etched with something between sadness and pride. You know, Rachel, he said softly, people can lose houses, cars, money, but losing their reputation in this town, that's harder to recover from. They'll feel this. I swallowed hard, clutching the railing. The article had unleashed a storm I couldn't control, but maybe control wasn't the point. Maybe it was about balance. For every time they had silenced me now, the world was speaking on my behalf. I went back inside and placed the newspaper clipping beside my grandmother's envelope on the desk. The two sat together like parts of a puzzle, one rooted in the past, one forcing its way into the present. As I turned off the lamp, the hum of voices from the street below drifted through the window. They weren't my family's voices, but they carried weight, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel entirely alone. The decision to go to Anna's new apartment building sat heavy in my chest as I parked on the street outside. The glass windows of the tower glinted in the late afternoon sun, expensive and smug, as if the place itself looked down on me. I walked into the lobby, the smell of polished marble and perfume making me feel out of place, and rode the elevator up with a knot in my stomach. When the door opened, Anna was already waiting with the keys dangling between her fingers like a trophy. Her lips curved in a smile that held no warmth. Inside, my parents sat stiffly on the white leather couch, the city skyline stretching behind them like a stage. Richard stood as soon as he saw me, his face red. His voice cracked like a whip. You betrayed your own parents. Do you even realize what you've done? Parading our family name in the papers like some circus act. Elaine's hands trembled as she pressed a tissue to her eyes. Rachel, how could you? You made us out to be monsters. Everyone stares when I walk into the market. I swallowed the air in the room thick with their accusations. You did that yourselves. I didn't make you sell the house. I didn't make you call me worthless. I told the truth. Anna's heels clicked as she crossed the room holding a glossy folder. She laid it on the coffee table with a flourish. This is the lease for my new penthouse. Signed, sealed, and paid for. $50,000 down thanks to Mark. While you're out crying to reporters, I'm building a life that actually matters. Her laugh was sharp. If it weren't for that accident of yours, no one would even remember your name. Do you think pity makes you important? The words cut, but I forced myself to stand straighter. Maybe pity isn't power, but truth is. People see what you did. You can't hide behind shiny cars and contracts forever. Richard slammed his hand on the table. You are no daughter of mine if you insist on dragging us through the mud. Elaine sobbed harder, her voice high and brittle. Stop this, Rachel. Just stop before everything falls apart. I looked at each of them, at the sister who used my pain as a stepping stone, at the parents who chose her shine over my survival. It already has. And it wasn't me who broke it. Anna's eyes narrowed, her face tightening with anger. You think some old trust fund or a pity article will make you stronger than me? You'll always be the one left behind. The silence that followed burned hotter than any shout. I could feel my pulse in my temples, every nerve alive. For a moment, I thought of turning away, of letting their words bury me again. but something inside refused to bend. I reached into my bag, fingers brushing against the worn edge of my grandmother's envelope, and met Anna's glare without blinking. "We'll see," I said quietly. Richard muttered something under his breath and turned away. Elaine buried her face in her hands, and Anna kept smiling, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. I walked toward the door, each step heavy yet steady. The skyline outside shimmered in the glass, as if mocking the chaos inside. I opened the door and stepped into the hallway, the echo of their voices trailing behind me like a storm still brewing. The door clicked shut, leaving me alone with the sound of my own heartbeat and the faint hum of the city below, and I knew this fight was far from over. The conference room smelled faintly of leather and coffee, the kind of place where decisions outlived the people who made them. I sat at one end of the polished table, my hands folded tight in my lap, watching the door as my parents and Anna walked in. Behind them trailed two cousins. I barely spoke to anymore, their expressions curious but unreadable. David Clark stood near the head of the table, his gray suit immaculate, a folder already open before him. He greeted everyone with the same calm voice, the one that made me feel both nervous and oddly safe. Richard took a seat with a heavy thud, his jaw locked. Elaine slipped in beside him, clutching her purse as if it might shield her from the truth. Anna chose the chair nearest the window, her new handbag resting on the table as if it belonged in the spotlight. David cleared his throat. "Thank you all for coming. I know tensions are high, but today is not about opinions. It is about facts." Richard scoffed. "Facts? The only fact is that our daughter has been tearing this family apart for her own benefit." David didn't flinch. He placed a thick document on the table, sliding it toward the center. "This is the trust established by Evelyn Morgan in 2018. She named Rachel Morgan the sole beneficiary. The assets in question amount to $2 million in both liquid funds and property rights." The room fell silent. I could hear Elaine's quick intake of breath, sharp as glass. Anna leaned forward, her nails tapping against the wood. "You expect us to believe that Richard barked? Show us the proof." David lifted another sheet, this one bearing the neat, unmistakable signature of my grandmother. "Here it is. And as you can see, it was notarized with two independent witnesses present. Both are here today to reaffirm the validity." Two older men seated at the far end of the table nodded quietly. One adjusted his glasses and said, "We were there." Evelyn was clear in her wishes. Elaine's face drained of color. But she loved all of us. Why would she only name Rachel? David's tone remained measured. "Mrs. Morgan, your mother made her reasoning clear. She felt Rachel had not been supported fairly and wanted to correct that imbalance. She anticipated there might be conflict, which is why she added a no contest clause. If anyone challenges this trust in court, they forfeit any right to any inheritance, including items already distributed." Richard slammed his hand down, making the coffee cups rattle. "You cannot threaten me with legal jargon. That money belongs to this family, not just her." David met his stare evenly. "If you file a suit, Mr. Morgan, you and your wife will lose everything tied to Evelyn's estate. That is the legal consequence. It is not a threat. It is the law." The silence that followed was thick, stretching long enough for the ticking clock on the wall to punctuate each second. Anna broke it with a sharp laugh. "So the sick little teacher gets the reward. Grandma always did have a soft spot for the weak." Her words stung, but for the first time I didn't shrink. I sat up straighter, letting my eyes sweep the table, meeting each gaze without flinching. "Weak I survived when none of you cared if I did. Grandma saw me even when you refused to." Elaine pressed her hands together, whispering, "This will destroy us." "No," I said, my voice steady, though my heart pounded. "You destroyed us when you sold the house, when you chose appearances over family. All I am doing is claiming what was always meant for me." David closed the folder gently, his part finished. "This trust is binding. There is nothing further to debate." For the first time since the accident, I felt the ground under me solidify. The weight of their contempt was still heavy, but it no longer crushed me. I could see the recognition in their eyes, even if they would never admit it. They could not erase what Evelyn had left me. Anna's smile faltered just for a second, her confidence cracking like glass under strain. Richard leaned back, seething, but silent, and Elaine stared at the table as if the wood grain could give her back the past. I stood slowly smoothing my hands over my skirt. I didn't come here to humiliate anyone. I came here to honor my grandmother. She gave me more than money. She gave me back my voice. The room stayed quiet as I turned toward the door. My reflection in the glass panel looked steadier than I felt, but for the first time I did not mind. I stepped into the hallway, the hush of the office surrounding me, and let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. For once I walked away, not as the forgotten daughter, but as someone finally seen. Anna's new Mercedes still gleamed under the sunlight when I saw it parked outside her building, but it looked lonelier than ever without Mark by her side. Word had spread that he had left her for someone else, a younger woman with fewer demands and fewer debts. The shine of that car became less a trophy and more a reminder of what she had traded for approval that never truly came. I heard from neighbors that Richard and Elaine had moved in with her, clutching at what remained of their pride while relying on her roof. Yet even within those walls, there was no warmth. Anna resented their presence, rolling her eyes when they asked for help and snapping when Elaine offered to cook. I imagined my father pacing the halls, stripped of authority, my mother shrinking into herself, the house echoing with unspoken bitterness. At church, the silence was louder than the hymns. Once Richard used to stride through the doors, shaking hands and offering loud greetings. Now when the three of them entered, heads turned away, conversations stopped mid-sentence, and no one extended a hand. Elaine kept her gaze on the floor, clutching her Bible as if it were the only friend she had left. Richard tried to keep his shoulders straight, but rejection weighed heavier than pride. Cousins who once laughed at me over dinner tables no longer returned their calls. A wedding invitation passed through the family skipped their address. I watched it unfold quietly, not with cruelty, but with a strange calm, as if the world was balancing scales I had stopped trying to carry. Meanwhile, my days began to fill with something new. I met with David Clark to finalize paperwork, and then poured myself into building what Evelyn would have wanted. I rented an old brick building near the lakefront and transformed it into a community art center. We painted the walls white, brought in easels and pottery wheels, and filled the rooms with light. Children came after school, hands smeared with paint and eyes wide with imagination. Retired neighbors joined classes, rediscovering brushes and clay they had abandoned decades ago. At the opening ceremony, the mayor spoke about how Cleveland needed spaces like this, places where ordinary voices could be heard through art. I stood in the back, listening, remembering the nights I thought silence was all I had. Applause filled the room, and when they called my name, I stepped forward, my heart racing but steady. I didn't flaunt the trust fund. I used it the way Evelyn intended, turning it into something that multiplied rather than sat in a bank account. Each smile, each painting hung on the wall felt like proof that her faith in me was not misplaced. Once Anna's parties had drawn crowds chasing status. Now the people gathered in my space sought connection. There was no champagne, no velvet ropes, just shared stories and messy canvases. And yet the energy pulsed stronger than any gala I had ever endured. One evening as I locked up, I saw Anna across the street. She stood beside her car, arguing with my father, her hands flying in frustration. The streetlight caught her face, twisted with anger, and I could almost hear the sharpness in her voice. She saw me for a brief moment, and her expression faltered. But instead of crossing over, she turned her back. I drove home with the windows down, the night air cool against my skin. Karma had not come with fireworks or grand revelations. It had arrived quietly, steadily stripping away illusions until truth was all that remained. Their grandeur had become their burden, and my honesty had become my strength. It wasn't triumph I felt, not exactly. It was something deeper, a kind of peace I hadn't known was possible. Evelyn's voice lingered in my memory, gentle but firm, reminding me that worth was never measured in cars or houses, but in what we built for others. The next morning I walked through the art center again before the students arrived. Sunlight poured through the windows, warming the wooden floors, and I pressed my hand to the wall, feeling the life inside it. This was my inheritance, not the money itself, but the chance to create something lasting. Outside, the world kept moving, and I knew their downfall wasn't mine to savor. It was theirs to live with. And for me, the path forward was no longer about proving them wrong, but about honoring what was finally right. The late afternoon light stretched long across the quiet street as I stood at the edge of the sidewalk staring at the house that had once carried the weight of my childhood. The paint was fresh now, a softer shade of blue than I remembered, and the lawn was neatly trimmed. Toys were scattered across the grass. A small bicycle leaned against the porch, and laughter drifted faintly through an open window. A different family lived there now, their voices weaving into the walls that had once carried mine. I did not step onto the property. Instead, I rested my hand gently on the public side of the wooden fence, the rough grain pressing into my palm. It was enough to feel connected, not as an owner, but as someone who had finally let go. The air smelled faintly of cut grass, and a breeze lifted my hair, as if even the wind wanted me to move forward. Memories rose easily, not as sharp stabs of loss, but as soft echoes. I could see myself running barefoot across the yard, hear Evelyn's voice calling me in for dinner. Remember the sound of my father's hammer as he worked on the porch steps. Those sounds no longer hurt. They were chapters closed, not wounds left open. I thought of Anna, of her Mercedes parked in a garage she could barely afford, of the silence that followed her wherever she went now that Mark was gone. I thought of Richard and Elaine, two parents who had spent everything chasing appearances, only to find themselves standing in pews where no one greeted them. For years I had carried the desire to confront them, to demand apologies that never came. Now I realized I no longer needed them. Their lives were their own consequences, and mine was no longer bound to theirs. The small brass key Evelyn had left me pressed against my thigh from inside my pocket. I took it out and turned it in my hand. It was worn, its edges softened from years of use, carrying the weight of 1,000 entries and exits. Once I thought this key was the last connection to a home that was stolen from me. Now, as I looked at the house glowing with the warmth of another family's life, I understood it was only a symbol, and its meaning had shifted. I closed my fist around it, then slipped it back into my pocket, not to unlock doors that were no longer mine, but to remind me of the strength it took to survive losing them. I smiled not with bitterness, but with the kind of quiet acceptance that comes when a fight no longer owns you. The world had given me the chance to rebuild, and I had taken it. The art center thrived, children's voices filling rooms, once empty canvases stretching across walls with colors Evelyn would have adored. Strangers had become community, and my name was no longer whispered with pity, but spoken with respect. I had stopped needing to prove anything, and in doing so, I had become everything they said I was not. The house across the street lit up as the family inside gathered for dinner. I imagined the clatter of plates, the laughter over small jokes, the comfort of ordinary love. It was theirs now, and I was glad. My chapter here had ended, and theirs had begun. I turned away from the fence, the pavement cool beneath my shoes, as I walked down the block. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of amber and rose, and for the first time in years, I felt weightless. The past was behind me, not erased, but no longer in control. I had finally understood. Value was never in a house or a car, not in the applause of a crowd or the approval of parents who could not see me. It was in living a life that was mine alone and finding purpose where others had tried to take it away. If this story has found its way into your heart, if you have ever carried wounds that felt too heavy or faced voices that tried to silence you, then stay with me. Together we can walk through more journeys of justice, family, and dignity, and remind each other that strength is never in what they give us, but in what we choose to keep alive inside ourselves.